There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. They wear the clothes of a Tuesday night, smell like day-old pizza and clean laundry, and sound like the quiet hum of a refrigerator in a small apartment. You don't recognize them as watershed events at the time. There is no thunderclap, no sudden, cinematic swell of music. There is only the subtle shift of weight on a mattress, the almost inaudible catch of a breath, and a question that hangs in the air, heavy and fragile as a spider's web. Only later, when you trace the map of your life backward, do you see that this quiet, unassuming moment was, in fact, the continental divide, the point from which all rivers of your future would flow in a new and terrifying direction. For me, that moment was a challenge, whispered in the dark, a dare I never wanted, from the one person I could never refuse. And my first instinct, the only one I trusted after years of careful self-preservation, was to run. He said it so quietly, his voice a low rumble against the pillow next to my ear. Prove you like me. The words weren't a taunt, not exactly. They weren't a playful joke, either. They landed in the silent space between us with the weight of a stone, creating ripples of panic that spread through my chest and tightened my throat. For months, our friendship had been a study in carefully blurred lines and plausible deniability. It had become a fragile ecosystem of unspoken needs, of a hand finding a shoulder in the dark, of two bodies sharing a bed under the thinnest of pretexts. I was the keeper of this fragile world, the silent observer cataloging every gesture, every sigh, every moment of proximity that felt both like a gift and a curse. I had learned to live in the gray space, to find a strange, aching comfort in the ambiguity because the alternative, the stark black and white of confession and rejection, was a landscape I couldn't bear to imagine. And now, with 4 simple words, he was trying to burn the whole beautiful, painful charade to the ground. Liam. Of course, it was Liam. He was a creature of impulse and forward motion, a software engineer who thought in binary and solved problems by taking them apart. He couldn't exist in the gray. He needed a 1 or a 0, a true or a false. My entire existence, in relation to him, had become a complex algorithm of maybes and what-ifs, a language he was constitutionally incapable of speaking. I lay there, my body rigid, my heart hammering a frantic, terrified rhythm against my ribs. The air in the room felt thick, charged with the static of his expectation. Prove it. What did that even mean? Did he want a confession? A kiss? Did he want me to dismantle the fortress I had so painstakingly built around my heart, brick by painful brick, just to satisfy a moment of his own confused curiosity? The silence stretched, and I could feel his gaze on me in the darkness, a tangible pressure. He was waiting for an answer, for an action, for some piece of data that would solve the equation of us. In that moment, a cold, clear certainty washed over me, extinguishing the panic with its icy calm. I couldn't prove it. Not like this. To do so would be to turn something sacred and private into a performance. It would be an admission under duress, a confession extracted not by love, but by a challenge. My feelings for him were not a theorem to be proven. They were a quiet, deeply rooted part of my own geography, a hidden cove I retreated to when the world was too loud. To expose that place on demand felt like a violation. It felt cheap. More than that, it felt like a trap. If I made a move, and he recoiled, he could always say he was just kidding, just pushing my buttons. The plausible deniability would be his, and the humiliation would be mine. The friendship, our fragile, precious ecosystem, would be poisoned beyond recovery. I had spent years learning to live with the quiet ache of my unspoken affection. I would not let him turn it into the loud, public shame of a miscalculation. So I made the only choice that felt safe. The only choice that felt like mine. I chose negation. I chose retreat. Slowly, carefully, as if trying not to startle a wild animal, I began to untangle my legs from the sheets. The movement was small, but in the profound silence of the room, it felt like a tectonic shift. I pushed myself up onto one elbow, the old mattress creaking in protest. The cool night air hit my bare shoulders, a stark contrast to the radiating warmth of his body beside me. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. I focused on the faint rectangle of moonlight on the far wall, a pale, ghostly projection from the window. My objective was the door. My objective was the couch in the other room, a familiar and blessedly lonely sanctuary. My objective was to put space between his question and my answer, to let the silence and the distance say what I could not. I would not prove it. I would disprove it. I would walk away. What are you doing? His voice was sharp now, stripped of its earlier softness. The rumbling undertone was gone, replaced by a blade of confusion, and something else I couldn't quite identify. Annoyance? Hurt. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, my feet finding the cool, worn wood of the floor. My back was to him, a deliberate wall. I'm going to the couch, I said, my own voice sounding hollow and distant to my ears. There was a rustle of sheets behind me, a sudden surge of energy in the room. Leo, stop, it was a command. I froze, my hand hovering just above the doorknob. My entire body was a tightly wound spring of anxiety. This was not how it was supposed to go. I was supposed to retreat, and he was supposed to let me. The unspoken rules of our dynamic dictated that when the tension became too much, one of us would create distance, and the other would respect it. It was a silent, mutual retreat to our respective corners until the air cleared. But he wasn't retreating. He was advancing. Why? He asked, and the word was laced with a genuine, raw frustration that stunned me. I ask you for one thing. I ask you to prove it, and you get up and walk away? What the hell is that? I turned then, because I had to. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He was sitting up in bed, the sheet pulled around his waist, his silhouette stark against the moonlight filtering through the window. His face was a mess of shadows, but I could feel the anger rolling off him in waves. He was mad. He was actually genuinely mad that I was leaving. The absurdity of it was staggering. He had thrown a live grenade into the middle of our friendship, and now he was angry at me for trying to get away from the blast. My carefully constructed logic, my plan for self-preservation, shattered into a million pieces. Nothing made sense. The ones and zeros were gone. All that was left was this chaotic, emotional mess, and him, sitting in the middle of it, looking at me as if I had just betrayed him in the most fundamental way imaginable. It's strange how something so monumental can begin so simply. Liam and I met in a sophomore-level elective we both took to fill a humanities credit, the history of cinema. It was one of those sprawling lecture hall classes where you could disappear into the anonymity of the crowd. I was a photography major, quiet and observant by nature, and I was there for the art of it, the composition, the lighting, the way a story could be told without a single word. Liam, a computer science student with a mind that moved at 1,000 miles an hour, was there because it fit his schedule and he heard the exams were easy. He was the kind of person who filled whatever space he occupied. He didn't walk into a room, he arrived. He had a loud, easy laugh and a gravitational pull that drew people into his orbit. We were, in every conceivable way, polar opposites. Our worlds collided over a broken projector. The professor, a man with a tweed jacket and a perpetually flustered air, was struggling to get a grainy print of Citizen Kane to play. The class was growing restless. Liam, who had been slouched in his seat 2 rows ahead of me, suddenly stood up. I can probably fix that, he announced to the room at large, and with the casual confidence of someone who had never encountered a problem he couldn't solve, he strode to the front of the lecture hall. I watched, fascinated, as he tinkered with cables and cycled through input menus. He didn't just understand machines, he spoke their language. Within 2 minutes, the iconic black and white image of Xanadu filled the screen, and the class erupted into a smattering of applause. Liam just gave a little shrug and a grin, his face illuminated by the projector's beam. In that moment, framed by the light, he looked like something out of one of the old films himself. I remember lifting my phone, almost unconsciously, and taking a picture. It was a terrible photo, blurry, poorly lit, but I still have it. It was the first frame in a collection that would, over the years, come to define a significant portion of my life. We didn't become friends right away. We were just 2 familiar faces in a sea of strangers. We'd nod in the hallway or exchange a brief, "Hey," if we passed on the campus quad. The real beginning was later that semester, in the library, during the week before finals. I was holed up in a corral, surrounded by stacks of books on photographic theory, trying to cram a semester's worth of reading into one caffeine-fueled night. Around 2 in the morning, a shadow fell over my desk. I looked up, bleary-eyed, to see Liam standing there, holding a laptop in one hand and 2 cans of energy drinks in the other. He looked exhausted, his usual bright energy dimmed to a low flicker. He gestured with one of the cans. "You look like you need this more than I do," he said, his voice raspy. He told me he was trying to finish a coding project that was due in 6 hours, and his brain had officially short-circuited. I told him I was trying to write a 15-page paper on the semiotics of post-war Italian neorealism. He blinked at me. "Right. So you definitely need it more than I do." He pulled up a chair and sat down, not at another Corel, but right there, next to me. He didn't talk much. He just typed, the click-clack of his keys a steady, rhythmic counterpoint to the frantic scribbling of my pen. We worked in a comfortable, companionable silence for hours, two strangers united by a shared deadline and the fluorescent hum of the library at dawn. When the sun started to streak the sky with pale pink and gray, he finally closed his laptop with a sigh of relief. He stretched, his arms reaching for the ceiling, and then he looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time. "I'm Liam, by the way," he said, as if we hadn't been sharing a tiny workspace for the past 4 hours. "I'm Leo," I replied. He smiled, a genuine, tired smile that made his whole face light up. "Well, Leo," he said, "thanks for sharing your misery. It made mine a little more bearable." That was the start. It was as simple and as complicated as that. Our friendship solidified over the next 2 years. It was an easy, natural thing that didn't seem to require any effort. We were an unlikely pair, the artist and the engineer, but our differences complemented each other. He would drag me out of my solitary world of darkrooms and editing software to go to parties or basketball games, pulling me into the noisy, vibrant current of his life. In return, I offered him a quiet harbor. He'd come over to my small, off-campus apartment to escape the chaos of his shared house, sprawling on my lumpy couch while I worked on my photos. He claimed the silence of my apartment helped him think that the smell of developer chemicals was somehow calming. I never told him that my heart did a little flip every time I heard his familiar knock on my door. I never told him that the silence wasn't empty when he was in it. It was full, charged with the simple, profound fact of his presence. It was during one of those quiet evenings that I first understood the true depth of my feelings for him. It was a gradual dawning, not a sudden revelation. It was more like developing a photograph in a darkroom, watching an image slowly emerge from the chemical bath, faint at first, then gaining clarity and definition until it was undeniably there. He had fallen asleep on my couch again, a textbook on data structures open on his chest. His head was lolled to the side, his mouth slightly open, and a stray lock of dark hair had fallen across his forehead. The late afternoon sun was streaming through the window, catching the line of his jaw and illuminating the faint stubble there. The whole world seemed to go quiet. The ticking of the clock, the distant traffic, my own breath, it all faded away. There was only him. I saw him not just as my friend, but as a landscape of breathtaking beauty and complexity. I saw the strength in the line of his shoulders and the vulnerability in the curve of his sleeping lips. I felt a wave of affection so powerful, so overwhelming, it almost knocked the air from my lungs. It was a feeling that was equal parts tenderness and terror. I loved him. It wasn't a question or a possibility. It was a fact, a solid, unmovable, terrifying fact. From that day forward, my life became a masterclass in compartmentalization. There was Leo, the friend, who could joke with Liam, listen to his problems, and offer him a place to crash. And there was the other Leo, the secret one, who archived every smile, every casual touch, every shared glance like a precious artifact. I became a skilled translator of his language, learning to interpret the nuances of his moods. I could tell by the set of his shoulders if he'd had a bad day at his internship, or by the pitch of his laugh if he was genuinely happy or just performing for the crowd. I studied him the way I studied a photograph, looking for the story in the details, the light, and the shadow. This secret knowledge, this hidden affection, felt like a heavy, precious stone I carried in my pocket. It was a burden, to be sure, but it was also a source of secret, private warmth. I told myself it was enough. To be his friend, his safe place, his quiet harbor, that had to be enough. To ask for more would be to risk everything, to capsize the delicate boat of our friendship and drown us both in the cold, deep water of my wanting. So I kept my silence. I built my walls. and I learned to live with the ache. The catalyst, when it came, was named Sarah. She was Liam's girlfriend for the better part of a year, his first serious relationship after college. She was nice enough, I suppose. Pretty, smart, ambitious. They looked good together, the kind of couple you'd see in a stock photo labeled Happy Young Professionals. When he was with her, the time he spent at my apartment dwindled. Our late-night talks were replaced by texts he'd send from her place. I told myself I was happy for him. I repeated it like a mantra, hoping that if I said it enough, it would become true. In a way, it was. I wanted him to be happy. But there was a selfish, ugly part of me that resented the space she took up in his life, a space that had once, in some small way, been mine. I was the before, and she was the after. I was the quiet black and white film. She was the vibrant, high-definition color. The breakup happened on a rainy Tuesday in November. My phone rang close to midnight. It was Liam, his voice thick and strange. "Can I come over?" he asked, without any preamble. He didn't need to explain. I knew. An hour later, he was standing on my doorstep, soaked to the bone, his face pale and drawn. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, as if the rain had washed away all his usual bravado. He walked into my apartment and just stood there in the middle of the living room, dripping onto my hardwood floor. "She ended it," he said, his voice cracking on the last word. "She said we want different things. She has this whole 5-year plan, and I don't even know what I want for breakfast tomorrow." He wasn't crying, but he looked like a man who had forgotten how. He looked lost. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't his girlfriend. I was just his friend. My role was clearly defined. Offer tea, offer a blanket, offer a sympathetic ear. So that's what I did. I made him a cup of chamomile tea that he didn't drink and wrapped him in a thick wool blanket. He sank onto my couch, staring at the blank television screen as if it held the answers to the universe. He started talking, not to me, but to the room. He talked about the future he thought he was building, the house in the suburbs, the 2.5 kids. It wasn't that he had been madly in love with Sarah, I realized. It was that he had been in love with the idea of her, with the neat, pre-packaged life she represented. She was a known variable, a clear path forward. Without her, he was adrift in a sea of infinite, terrifying possibilities. He was unmoored. That night, he fell asleep on my couch, curled under the blanket like a child. I watched him for a long time, the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest, the tension that remained in his jaw even in sleep. My heart ached for him, a pure, uncomplicated ache that had nothing to do with my own selfish feelings. I just wanted him to be okay. I wanted to smooth the worried lines from his forehead and tell him that not having a plan was all right, that being lost was just a temporary state of being. But I said nothing. I just pulled an extra comforter from my closet and gently draped it over him before retreating to my own room, leaving the door slightly ajar, just in case. I didn't know it then, but that small act, that cracked open door, was the beginning of a new chapter. It was the start of the ritual. What began that night as a one-time crisis response slowly, insidiously, became a routine. The first few times, there was a clear pretext. "I just really don't want to be alone in my apartment," he'd say, his voice small over the phone. "It feels so empty." And so he'd come over, and he'd take his familiar spot on the couch, and we'd watch a movie or just sit in silence until he drifted off to sleep. I would work at my desk, the soft sound of his breathing a quiet anchor in the room. It felt like a return to an older version of our friendship from before Sarah, and I soaked it in like a man dying of thirst. But then, the lines began to blur. The couch, it turned out, was not very comfortable for someone of his height. He'd wake up in the morning with a crick in his neck, groaning and complaining. One night, about 2 weeks after the breakup, he was sprawled uncomfortably, his long legs dangling off the end of the sofa. He tossed and turned, sighing in frustration. Finally, he sat up, running a hand through his already messy hair. "This is impossible," he muttered. He looked from the couch to the closed door of my bedroom, a hesitant, questioning look on his face. My heart stuttered. I knew what he was thinking. I could see the question forming before he even spoke it. The air crackled with the unspoken. I held my breath, waiting. "Leo," he started, his voice soft. "Your bed it's bigger than this couch, right?" It was a statement of fact, phrased as a question. It was a masterclass in plausible deniability. He wasn't asking to sleep in my bed. He was just inquiring about its dimensions. "It's a queen," I managed to say, my voice tight. Right? He said, as if this were a vital piece of information he was factoring into a complex equation. He stood up and stretched. Look, this is going to sound weird, but would you mind if I just took the other side? I promise I'll stay on my side. I just really need to get some actual sleep in my place. I just can't. Every word was carefully chosen to build a case, to construct a narrative in which this was a purely logistical decision. It was about comfort. It was about sleep. It had nothing to do with proximity or loneliness, or the fact that the space between us had become charged with a strange new energy. I should have said no. Every self-preservation instinct I had screamed at me to say no, to draw the line, to protect the fragile peace I had built. But he looked so tired, so lost, and the selfish, wanting part of me, the part one tried so hard to keep locked away, whispered that this was a gift. A dangerous, beautiful, terrifying gift. Okay, I said. The word was barely a whisper. Okay, Liam. That first night was torture, and it was heaven. I lay on my side of the bed, my body rigid, my muscles coiled tight. I was hyper-aware of everything. The dip in the mattress created by his weight, the scent of his shampoo on the pillow next to mine, the sound of his breathing, deeper and closer than it had ever been before. He kept his promise, staying meticulously on his side of the bed, a careful foot of space between us that felt both like a vast chasm and no distance at all. I didn't sleep. I lay awake for hours, listening to him sleep, my heart a frantic, trapped bird in my chest. I was a cartographer mapping a new and dangerous territory in the dark. This is the line of his shoulder. This is the warmth radiating from his back. This is the boundary. Do not cross. The next time he stayed over, he didn't even bother with the couch. He walked in, dropped his bag on the floor, and said, "Same deal as last time," as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And so it began. The ritual. 2 or 3 nights a week, my bed was no longer just my bed. It was our bed. The initial rigidity slowly softened. The carefully maintained distance began to shrink. It happened in increments so small they were almost imperceptible. A foot accidentally brushing against mine in the middle of the night. His arm, flung out in sleep, landing across my waist. The first time it happened, I froze, expecting him to pull away as soon as he realized. But he didn't. He just sighed, a soft, contented sound, and settled deeper into sleep, his arm a heavy, warm weight holding me in place. I lay there until dawn, barely breathing, memorizing the feeling. The ritual became the new architecture of my life. My weeks were structured around the nights he would be there and the nights he wouldn't. The nights he was gone, my bed felt unnervingly large and empty. The silence in my apartment was no longer peaceful, it was hollow. I had become addicted to his presence, to the quiet intimacy of sharing a space with him. And yet, the anxiety never fully went away. It was a constant, low-grade hum beneath the surface of my days. What did this mean? What were we doing? I was living in a state of suspended disbelief, a waking dream I was terrified to wake up from. I was a photographer living inside his own photograph, so close to the subject that everything was a beautiful, terrifying blur. I became an expert in interpreting the subtle shifts in our shared atmosphere. There were nights when the space between us was just that, space. We were 2 friends sharing a bed for convenience. But there were other nights. Nights when the air was thick with unspoken things. Nights when he would turn to face me in the dark, and I could feel his gaze on my face, and I would pretend to be asleep, my heart hammering against my ribs. On those nights, the silence was not empty. It was filled with questions. It was a physical presence, a third entity in the bed with us. He never crossed the final line. He never tried to kiss me. He never said the words. But the ritual itself was a kind of language. The steady encroachment of his body into my space, the way he would sometimes seek out my hand in his sleep, his fingers lacing through mine. It was a conversation happening just below the level of conscious thought. He was, I understood, the unknowing initiator. He was the one pushing the boundaries, but he was doing it from behind a shield of plausible deniability. He was lonely and confused, and he was seeking comfort in the only way he knew how, through physical proximity. He was reaching for me in his sleep because his conscious mind couldn't yet handle the implications of reaching for me when he was awake. And I, the quiet observer, let him. I allowed the lines to be blurred because I was just as scared as he was. I was terrified of naming what was happening between us, because to name it would be to force a choice. And I was not ready for a choice. I was content, in a painful, aching way, to live inside the question. The ritual was both my sanctuary and my prison. It was the source of my greatest joy and my most profound anxiety. It was a slow, beautiful, agonizing burn, and I had no idea how to put out the fire. I wasn't even sure I wanted to. The night it all came to a head began like any other night of the ritual. It was a Thursday. Liam had texted me earlier in the day, "Brutal week. Need to decompress. Your place tonight." I had replied with a simple, "Doors unlocked." He arrived late, looking haggard. He barely spoke, just dropped his laptop bag by the door, stripped off his work shirt, and collapsed onto the bed while I was brushing my teeth. By the time I came out of the bathroom, he was already under the covers, staring at the ceiling. I slid into my side of the bed, the familiar dip of the mattress, the familiar scent of him. But something was different. The usual, comfortable silence was replaced by a tense, thrumming energy. It was like the air before a thunderstorm, heavy and electric. We lay there for a long time, side by side, not touching. The silence stretched and stretched until it felt like a physical thing, pressing down on my chest. I could feel him thinking. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. Finally, he broke it. "Leo." His voice was quiet, tentative. "Yeah," I said, my eyes fixed on the ceiling. He rolled onto his side to face me. I felt the shift in the mattress, felt the direction of his energy change. I knew if I turned, I would see his face just inches from mine. I kept my gaze firmly upward. "Why are you so good to me?" he asked. The question was so earnest, so vulnerable. It felt like a punch to the gut. What was I supposed to say? Because I'm in love with you? Because watching you fall apart has been killing me? Because having you here, in my bed, is the best and worst thing that has ever happened to me? I opted for deflection. The truth was too dangerous. "You're my friend, Liam," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "That's what friends do." "No," he said, his voice firm. "It's more than that. My other friends, they bought me a beer. They told me there are other fish in the sea. They didn't do this." He gestured vaguely at the space around us, at the bed, the room, the whole fragile situation we had built. "This is different." I could feel his breath on my cheek now. He was so close. My carefully constructed walls were beginning to crumble. The water was rising. "I don't know what you want me to say," I whispered, the words tasting like a lie. There was another long pause. I could feel him studying my profile in the dim light. Then, he asked the question I had been dreading and longing for in equal measure for years. "Do you like me, Leo?" He said it so softly, the words were almost stolen by the silence. It wasn't accusatory. It was just a question. A simple, terrifying, world-altering question. My mind went into overdrive. This was it. The moment of truth. The black and the white. The 1 or the 0. I could lie, and maybe preserve the status quo for a little while longer. Or I could tell the truth, and risk everything. Years of self-protection warred with a desperate, bone-deep need to be known, to be seen. I couldn't bring myself to say the full truth. But I couldn't bring myself to lie, either. So I chose a third path. A half-truth. "Of course I like you, Liam," I said, my voice barely audible. "You're my best friend." I put the emphasis on friend, hoping it would be enough. Hoping it would be a shield. It wasn't. He was silent for a moment, and I thought, with a surge of desperate relief, that he was going to let it go. That he would accept my carefully chosen answer, and we could retreat back into the safety of our ambiguity. But he didn't. He pushed further, into the heart of the territory I had guarded for so long. He delivered the 4 words that I knew, even as he said them, would change everything. His voice was a low, challenging rumble, right next to my ear. "Prove you like me." And that was the moment. The continental divide. The grenade in the quiet room. My mind flashed with a dozen possible responses. I could lean in and kiss him. I could confess everything. I could ask him what he meant, force him to define the terms of his own challenge. But all of these options felt like a surrender. They felt like playing a game whose rules I didn't understand, a game I was destined to lose. The safest move, the only move that felt like it preserved some small piece of my own dignity, was to refuse to play at all, to walk off the field. So I began to move, to untangle myself from the sheets, to put distance between us. My retreat wasn't about rejecting him. It was about protecting myself. It was an act of profound and desperate self-preservation. I thought he would understand. I thought he would see it as my answer, a quiet, sad, and final no. I never, in a million years, expected him to get mad. His anger was the variable I hadn't accounted for. It threw my entire emotional calculus into disarray. "Where are you going?" he had demanded, his voice sharp with a hurt I couldn't comprehend. I stood by the door, my hand frozen just above the knob, my back to him, feeling like a cornered animal. My plan had been simple: retreat to the couch, create a physical boundary that would reinforce the emotional one I was so desperately trying to maintain. I would absorb the pain of his careless challenge in private, nurse my wounded pride in the dark, and in the morning, we could pretend it never happened. It was a familiar strategy, one I had perfected over years of loving him in secret. But his anger shattered that strategy. It was a direct confrontation, a refusal to let me retreat into my comfortable, painful silence. "I told you, I'm going to the couch," I said again, my voice strained. I was trying to sound calm, detached, but a tremor of frustration was starting to snake its way through me. Why couldn't he just let this go? Why did he have to pull at this thread until the entire tapestry of our friendship unraveled? "But why?" he insisted, and I could hear him shifting, the sound of the sheets rustling as he moved closer to the edge of the bed. "Leo, look at me." I didn't want to. Looking at him felt dangerous. Looking at him meant engaging with the emotional storm he had conjured, and I felt utterly unequipped to navigate it. But his tone held a new note, a pleading quality beneath the anger that made it impossible to refuse. I turned around slowly, my shoulders slumped in defeat. He was kneeling on the mattress now, his face a complex map of shadow and dim light from the window. His eyes, even in the dark, seemed to burn with a raw, confusing intensity. "You can't just do that," he said, his voice dropping lower, becoming more earnest. "You can't just say something like that, and then when I ask you to show me, you just walk away. It's like you're saying it doesn't matter." Like I don't matter, my breath caught in my throat. This was a level of emotional reasoning I had not anticipated. In his mind, my retreat was not an act of self-preservation. It was a dismissal of him. He had made himself vulnerable, in his own clumsy, challenging way, and I had responded by turning my back. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. We were having two completely different conversations. I was trying to protect a secret. He was trying to understand a truth. "That's not what I was doing," I said, my voice small. The frustration began to curdle into a profound, aching sadness. "Liam, you don't understand." "Then make me understand," he shot back, his hands clenched into fists on the mattress. "Because from where I'm sitting, my best friend, the only person I've felt normal with for months, just admitted he likes me and then decided he'd rather sleep on a lumpy couch than in the same bed as me. So yeah, I'm a little confused. And yeah, I'm a little pissed off." The words tumbled out of him in a torrent of frustration and hurt. He was laying it all bare, all his confusion, all his need. He was doing the one thing I had always been too afraid to do. He was being honest. And in the face of his raw, messy honesty, my careful silence, my strategic retreat, suddenly felt like a form of cowardice. I leaned my head back against the door, the cool wood a small comfort against my skin. I felt exhausted, stripped bare. The fortress I had spent years building had been breached, not by a frontal assault, but because the person I was trying to keep out had somehow ended up on the inside with me, demanding to know why the walls were there in the first place. "What did you expect me to do, Liam?" I asked, my voice weary. "You said, prove it like it's a dare. Like it's some kind of test. My feelings for you, they're not a game. I'm not going to perform them on command just so you can satisfy some passing curiosity while you figure out your own life." The words were sharper than I intended, laced with all the stored-up pain and resentment of the past few months, the past few years. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. He was quiet for a long moment, the anger draining out of his face, replaced by a look of stunned hurt. "A passing curiosity," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "You think that's what this is?" He shook his head, a gesture of disbelief. "Leo, for months, I've been a wreck. My whole life fell apart. I lost my job 2 weeks ago. Did I even tell you that? I didn't. Because I didn't want to be another problem you had to solve. The only thing that has felt real, that has felt safe, is being here. With you." He gestured again to the bed, to the small apartment. "I fall asleep on your couch. So you let me into your bed. I steal your blankets, and you just pull another one out of the closet. I'm a mess, and you just make space for me. And I don't understand it. And I'm terrified of it. Because it's the only thing I don't want to lose. The confession hung in the air between us, raw and shocking. He'd lost his job. He hadn't told me. He had been carrying that burden alone, on top of everything else. The revelation recontextualized everything. His need to be here, his presence in my bed. It wasn't just about the breakup with Sarah. It was a deeper, more profound displacement. He wasn't just unmoored. He was sinking. And I was his lifeboat. The anger I had felt just moments before evaporated, replaced by a wave of overwhelming empathy and a sharp, painful guilt for my own assumptions. While I had been obsessing over the romantic implications of his every move, he had been struggling with things I hadn't even let myself see. "Why didn't you tell me about your job?" I asked softly. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Pride, I guess. I'm supposed to be the one who has it all figured out, right? The engineer with the 5-year plan. Turns out my plan was just as imaginary as the one Sarah had." He finally looked at me, his eyes pleading. "When I'm here, I don't have to be that guy. I can just be." And I started to realize that the reason I felt safe here wasn't because of the apartment. It was because of you. And that scared the hell out of me. Because I don't know what that means. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that feeling. And there it was. The truth. Not the clean, binary truth of a yes or a no, but the messy, complicated, human truth. He was scared. He was confused. His feelings for me were tangled up with his loneliness, his fear of failure, and his desperate need for a safe harbor. His challenge to prove it wasn't a taunt. It was a desperate, clumsy plea for clarity. It was his way of saying, "I feel something for you that I don't understand. Please show me what it is. Please show me I'm not crazy." And I had responded by walking away. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't tense or anxious. It was heavy with the weight of shared vulnerability. He had laid his cards on the table, a messy, confusing hand. Now it was my turn. I pushed myself off the door and slowly walked back towards the bed. I didn't get back in. I just sat on the edge, my back to him, trying to find the words. "I'm sorry," I said, the words feeling inadequate. "I'm sorry about your job. You should have told me. And I'm sorry I walked away. I thought you were playing with me. I thought it was a joke." "It wasn't a joke," he said quietly from behind me. "I don't know what it was, but it wasn't a joke." I took a deep breath, the air feeling shaky in my lungs. "I've had feelings for you for a long time, Liam," I said to the floorboards. "Years. Before Sarah, before any of this. I just got very good at hiding it, at living with it, because I couldn't lose you as a friend. I couldn't risk it. When you and Sarah broke up, and you started staying here, it was hard. It was wonderful, and it was agonizing, because I never knew what it meant. I was so terrified of misinterpreting everything, of seeing something that wasn't there. Tonight, when you said that, prove it, it felt like a trap. It felt like you were asking me to expose myself just so you could reject me. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I tried to protect myself. I finally risked a glance over my shoulder. He was looking at me, his expression unreadable. He had processed my words, but I had no idea where they had landed. He seemed to be retreating into himself, the way he did when a coding problem was too complex. He was analyzing, processing, trying to make sense of this new, overwhelming data. The connection we'd had just moments before was severed. He was withdrawing. He pulled his knees up to his chest, wrapping his arms around them, creating a fortress of his own. I need some space," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I need to think." My heart sank. I had finally told him the truth, the whole, unvarnished truth, and his response was to pull away. The irony was devastating. I had spent years hiding my feelings to keep him close, and the moment I revealed them, he needed space. "Okay," I whispered. I stood up, the brief hope I'd felt just moments before turning to ash in my mouth. I went back to the door. This time, he didn't stop me. I walked out of my own bedroom, closing the door softly behind me, and went to the lumpy, uncomfortable, and profoundly lonely couch. I had finally answered his challenge. I had proven it, and it had, it seemed, cost me everything. The days that followed were a special kind of hell. The silence in my apartment was no longer just hollow, it was accusatory. Every object seemed to mock me. The indentation on the couch cushion where he used to sit. The extra mug by the coffee maker. The closed bedroom door, a barrier that now felt impassable. He left early the next morning, before I was even awake. There was just a note on the kitchen counter, written on a torn piece of paper towel. Need to clear my head. Talk soon. Soon turned out to be a flexible term. A day passed, then two, then a week. My texts went unanswered. My calls went straight to voicemail. He had vanished, retreating into a silence so complete it felt like a verdict. I cycled through every stage of grief for a friendship I wasn't even sure was over. At first, there was denial. He was just busy. He was processing. He said he needed space, and I had to respect that. Then came anger. How could he do this? How could he demand honesty and then punish me for it? How could he open me up, expose the most vulnerable part of myself, and then just walk away without a word? Then came the bargaining. I composed 100 different texts in my head, each one carefully crafted to be casual, unthreatening. Hey, just wanted to see if you're okay. No pressure, but I'm worried about you. Did you ever get that coding bug figured out? I never sent any of them. Finally, I landed in the vast, gray landscape of depression. I had been right all along. I had risked it, and I had lost. The beautiful, painful charade was over, replaced by this stark, empty reality. He knew, and he couldn't handle it. The friendship was broken. The ritual was over. Everything was over. I tried to fill the silence. I threw myself into my photography, spending long hours in the darkroom, the smell of chemicals a pungent and lonely companion. I tried to see the world through my lens again, but everything looked flat, desaturated. The light I had always been so attuned to seemed to have vanished from the world. I went out with other friends, tried to engage in conversations, but I felt like I was behind a thick pane of glass, watching the world happen without me. My thoughts were a constant, looping replay of that night. His anger, his confession, my confession, his withdrawal. I dissected every word, every gesture, searching for the exact moment it had all gone wrong. Was it when I tried to walk away? Or was it when I finally told him the truth? After 10 days of torturous silence, I couldn't take it anymore. The not knowing was worse than any rejection. I needed an ending to the story, even if it was a sad one. I needed a period at the end of the sentence. Fueled by a mixture of desperation and resolve, I drove to his apartment. It was the first time I had been there since his breakup with Sarah. I stood outside his door for a full 5 minutes, my heart hammering in my chest, my hand hovering over the buzzer. What was I even going to say? I still didn't know. I just knew I couldn't go back to my silent apartment, to the ghost of him in my bed. I finally pressed the button. I heard shuffling from inside, and then the door opened a crack. He peered out, and his face was a wreck. He was unshaven, with dark circles under his eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. When he saw it was me, his expression flickered with something I couldn't read: panic, relief, guilt. "Leo," he said, his voice hoarse. "Can I come in?" I asked, my own voice surprisingly steady. He hesitated for a second, then opened the door wider and stepped back. His apartment was a mess. Pizza boxes were stacked on the coffee table, clothes were strewn over the furniture. It looked like the physical manifestation of his mental state. He didn't invite me to sit. He just stood there by the door, his arms crossed over his chest, a defensive posture. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "You said you'd talk to me," I replied, trying to keep the accusation out of my voice. "It's been 10 days, Liam." "I know," he said, looking at the floor. "I'm sorry. I haven't known what to say." "Try something," I said, my patience finally snapping. "Try anything. Try go away, Leo. You've made things weird. Try I'm straight. You idiot. What were you thinking? Try I was lonely and confused and I used you. Just say something, Liam. Because this silence, this is killing me." He looked up at me then, his eyes filled with a miserable, conflicted honesty. "I can't say any of those things," he said quietly, "because none of them are true. Well, the lonely and confused part is true. But I didn't use you. I would never use you." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure frustration. "Leo, I've been going out of my mind. I haven't slept. I haven't eaten. I just keep replaying that night. Everything you said. Everything I said. I go to my bed, and it's empty, and I think I should call Leo. And then I think, what would I even say? And then I think about you, in your bed, and I wonder if you're thinking about me. And then I think about what it felt like, lying next to you. How it was the only time in months that my brain shut up, and I actually felt calm." He started pacing the small living room, his words coming faster now. And that terrifies me, because I'm 25 years old, and I thought I knew who I was. I like women. I've always liked women. Sarah, my life was supposed to be with her, or someone like her. That was the plan. But then I think about kissing her, and it feels like a memory from a black and white movie. And this is the part that's been messing me up. I think about kissing you, and it feels different. It feels like something my body understands, even if my head doesn't. It's not black and white. It's color, and I don't know what to do with that. I stood there, rooted to the spot, listening to him unravel. All his fear, all his confusion, all his carefully constructed identity crashing against this one undeniable feeling. He wasn't rejecting me. He was wrestling with himself. He wasn't running from me. He was running from what I made him feel, from the person he was afraid he might be. My own pain and anger melted away, replaced by a profound, heartbreaking wave of love for this messy, confused, beautiful man. He wasn't the unknowing initiator anymore. He knew, and it was tearing him apart. He finally stopped pacing and stood in front of me, his eyes searching mine, desperate for an answer I didn't have. "What do I do, Leo?" he whispered. "Tell me what to do." I closed the distance between us, and for the first time, I was the one to initiate. I reached out and gently took his hand. His skin was cold, but his fingers curled around mine instantly, a reflex. "You don't have to do anything," I said softly. "You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't need a new 5-year plan. You just have to stop running. From me." From this, I squeezed his hand. "Can you do that? Can you just stay? And we can figure out the rest of it together." Tears welled in his eyes, and he gave a shaky, watery laugh. "Yeah," he whispered. "Yeah, I think I can do that." He didn't let go of my hand. He just stood there, holding on to me as if I were the only solid thing in a world that had dissolved into chaos around him. In that moment, holding his hand in the middle of his messy apartment, I knew that nothing was over. In fact, it was just beginning. We didn't solve everything that day. There was no magical moment of clarity where all his confusion vanished, and he declared his undying love. Life isn't a movie. It's slower, and it's messy, eh? I talked about the loneliness of my secret, the years spent watching him from a distance, the quiet ache of loving someone who you believe can never love you back. We were two people who had been living in different, self-imposed prisons, and for the first time, we were showing each other the keys. That night, he came back to my apartment, but it was different. There was no pretext, no plausible deniability. He walked in, dropped his bag, and met my eyes across the room. There was a question in his gaze, but it wasn't a challenge anymore. It was a soft, hesitant inquiry. I answered by walking over to him, taking his face in my hands, and gently kissing him. It wasn't a passionate, desperate kiss. It was quiet. It was tentative. It was a question and an answer all at once. It tasted of coffee and relief and the start of something new. It felt like coming home. We went to bed, and for the first time, there was no invisible line down the middle of the mattress. He turned to me, and I turned to him, and he wrapped his arms around me, pulling me close until there was no space left between us at all. He buried his face in my neck, and I felt the tension finally leave his body as he let out a long, shuddering sigh. "This," he whispered against my skin. "This is what feels right." I held him, my hand stroking his hair, and I felt a sense of peace so profound it was almost overwhelming. The war was over. The anxiety, the guessing, the fear, it had all quieted. All that was left was this: the simple, solid reality of him in my arms. The quiet harbor after the storm. The days and weeks that followed were a process of learning a new language together. It was a language of intentional touches, of hands sought out and held while we watched movies, of kisses stolen in the kitchen while we waited for the kettle to boil. It was a language of quiet reassurance. When I would see a flicker of the old fear in his eyes, a shadow of the man who thought he was supposed to be someone else, I would just take his hand and hold it until the shadow passed. And when my own insecurities would whisper that this was all temporary, that he would wake up one day and change his mind, he would seem to sense it. He would pull me closer, kiss my forehead, and say, "I'm not going anywhere." We were healing, not just from the wounds we had inflicted on each other in our fear and confusion, but from the older, deeper wounds of our own loneliness. The ritual was gone, replaced by a new, more honest routine. The bedroom door was no longer left ajar as a tentative invitation. It was closed, because we were both on the same side of it. My apartment, once my solitary sanctuary, became our shared space. His toothbrush appeared in my bathroom. His favorite brand of coffee appeared in my cupboard. His laugh, no longer a sound I just observed, became a part of the apartment's daily soundtrack. He found a new job, a better one at a small startup where his creativity was valued more than his ability to follow a pre-written plan. He was rebuilding his life, but this time, he wasn't doing it alone. And he was building it around a new center of gravity. Around us. There are moments in your life that are loud and cinematic, the grand, sweeping gestures of love and change. But I've learned that the most profound transformations often happen in the quiet spaces, in the gentle, unassuming moments. They happen in the comfortable silence between two people who no longer need words to understand each other. They happen in the simple act of a hand finding another in the dark. Love, I discovered, wasn't a theorem to be proven. It was a space to be built, a home to be created, brick by honest brick. It wasn't about grand declarations. It was about the quiet, daily choice to stay, to be present, to make room for someone in your life, not just in your bed, but in your heart. And as we lay there, night after night, in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create together, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that we were finally home.